Hey Josh, this is the example I believe you're asking about. When you're solving an inequality that is nonlinear, you want to make sure you get 0 on one side and everything else on the other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a to the third to both sides. And then because I like to have my 0 on the right, which is just a preference, you don't have to do this, but I like to have my inequality and 0 on the right hand side, I'm just going to switch my order here. I can do this as long as this open side here is still facing the polynomial and the pointy side is still facing 0, so that it still reads that that polynomial is greater than or equal to 0. Okay, once you get everything to one side and 0 on the other, because this is a polynomial, we can factor this to find the zeros. So I'm going to pull out an a. And then I can factor what's in here still and break it down a little bit more, and that would be, let's see, that would be a plus 12 and a minus 1. Okay, then, so my zeros will be 0, negative 12, and 1. So this is what I'm going to use for my sign chart. So I have negative 12 over here. I have 0, and then I have 1. You want to set it up like a number line so that it's in order. And then what you want to do is you want to pick test points in between each of those values so that you know what the sign is on each of those intervals, whether it's positive or negative. If you get a positive sign, that means your y value on that interval is positive, which means it lies above the x-axis. And if you get a negative sign, that means your y value is negative, which means it lies below the y-axis. So when I start plugging in test points, for this interval here, less than negative 12, if I say plug in negative 13 or negative 14, it doesn't matter what value you pick, you just want to make sure you pick something that's on that interval. So when I start plugging in values that are less than negative 12, I'm going to get negative values. So on this interval, from minus infinity up to negative 12, I'm going to have negative values, which means if I look at the graph, that piece of the graph is going to fall below the x-axis. Now at negative 12, I know that this is a 0. Then if I pick a point between negative 12 and 0, let's say negative 2 or negative 1, if I start plugging in points between negative 12 and 0, I'm going to get positive values, which means on the interval from negative 12 to 0, the graph is going to be above the x-axis. And then at 0, it touches the x-axis, that's a 0. And then if I pick a point between 0 and 1, say 0.5, I'm going to get negative values, which means it's going to drop below the x-axis between 0 and 1. And then if I go past 1 to the right, say 2, 3, 4, anything greater than 1, I'm going to start getting positive values. And at 1, it's a 0, so I'm going to label that on my sign chart. Once you have your sign chart set up, then you can answer the question. This question is asking, where is this polynomial greater than or equal to 0? Which means where is it positive or equal to 0? And the question says to write it in interval notation. So whenever it's equal to 0, I want to use a bracket. And I'm looking for intervals where it's positive. So my answer is going to be negative 12, including negative 12 because it's 0 there, to 0, union. And then we have another interval that's positive and a value that's equal to 0 at 1. So we're going to write it like this. Now with infinity, remember you want to use parentheses, but everything greater than 1 would be positive as well. And you can verify this by looking at the graph. if you look at the graph, I'm just making a sketch here. It's not accurate by any means. It's going to look something like this, where this is the point at negative 12. Here's my other 0 at 0, and here's my other 0 at 1. So anywhere it drops below the x-axis is going to be negative. So that's this right here and this right here. And then anywhere it lies above the x-axis will be positive. That would be right here and right here. Now, the only difference, if I had changed my question to a times a plus 12 times a minus 1, and if I just said I want it to be where it's greater than 0, I would not include my zeros. So the only thing that would change if this was my question is I would use parentheses where my zeros are, because I don't want to include where x equal to 0. So I would have this. So it really depends on if it's asking you for whether it's positive or negative, and then whether or not you want to include the zeros. Hopefully that helps you.